Hi everyone, and welcome back to 7 by 7, the Tribal Habits video blog where we address the big questions in the learning and development industry. I'm joined as always by David King. How are you today, Dave?
I am well, Jordan. How are you doing?
Yeah, excellent.
That's the stuff.
Dave, today we're talking about budgeting. And I want to go through not only how you arrive at a budget, but maybe more vitally, how you defend your position that you've arrived at in a meeting. I think budgeting can be a really complicated topic. It's akin to how long is a piece of string. With more budget, we can do more things. So I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on this one today. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Just go through some of the ways that people can arrive at a reasonable training budget.
Yeah, I think why don't we start with that? Because I've seen a couple of different metrics people use, and they're each worth talking about, and they each have their pros and cons. So probably the first metric I'd look at is just a training budget per employee. So if you look at something like the ATD, the Association of Talent Development in the States, they do an annual report surveying on training spend, as do other industry bodies around the world. And this throws back numbers of dollars spent per employee. And then the surveys kind of come out around about $1,000, kind of 900 to about 1,400, somewhere in there. Bigger organizations tend to spend a little more than smaller organizations. It is pretty variable though, and it does vary between industries. It also depends on how much human resource as a talent is important to your organization. In some respects, training's like the CapEx for humans. But if your organization actually has CapEx, it has machines and things it's developing, there may be money spent on that for performance improvements through your processes over there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a starting point of somewhere in that 900 to 1,400 range for the average organization.
Okay, so that's a really interesting data point there, I think, but it's not the only one that organizations can use when they're trying to arrive at a budget, is it?
That's right. And the problem with per employee is it's not really linked to anything. It's just take a whole bunch of spend, divide it by number of employees. Another metric I see is training as a percent of revenue. This is very variable as well. Again, because some companies just need to spend more on training because they have more humans. The surveys I see on this say that most organizations spend between about 0.5%, maybe as much as 2% of revenue on training. There's some organizations that spend as much as 5%, and I guess they must be very human intensive or undergoing significant skills retraining. But if you're spending kind of 0.5% to 2% of revenue, I think this also aligns training to output. In other words, as the organization is doing well and is growing, training grows with it. So I like that sort of alignment there, and it helps training kind of benefit when the organization grows as well and not get left behind.
Yeah, I've heard some organizations setting a training budget as a proportion of staff salary. And I don't know if this is something that is used more as a recruitment tool. That's like, if you join us, this is what your training will look like. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I haven't heard it. That's an interesting point, actually. I actually like this metric in many respects because if training is for humans, well, salaries is the closest metric we have to that. And in the same way as when organizations grow and their kind of revenue grows, if you have your training linked to revenue, training grows. Well, it's the same thing with salary. As you put on more staff and the overall salary bill grows, your training budget grows with it. I think this also works well when there has to be some sort of linkage between how much you spend on salaries versus training. So if we go back to the $1,000 per person, well, that might make sense if the average salary for each person is 70 grand, but if the average salary for each person is 30 grand, then $1,000 per person probably doesn't make sense. But if we do it as a percentage of salary, then it kind of deals with that. It kind of puts everything in the right perspective. I see a bunch of surveys that kind of say 2 to 6% of salary, which means if salaries are about 35% of your overall revenue, you come out at the same metric as the revenue numbers we discussed. So of the three so far, I actually don't mind the salary one because I think it kind of highly links everything together.
Yeah, okay. And what else? Is there a fourth point that people can look at?
Yeah, there's another one, of course, which is to say that the training should be correlated to outcomes. And so I find this one really interesting. It's not always possible, but when it is possible, it's great. So let's say you have an outcome you define in your organization that has a financial metric. Let's say you need to get sales up by $100,000. So the organization, that's the goal, $100,000 up. And you've got a bunch of different ways you can get sales up. You can spend more on marketing, you can recruit better salespeople, you can have better products, you can have discounts, or you can upskill your staff to be better salespeople. And so you might look at the overall objective of 100K and you might say, you know what, of the 100K, we need our staff just to be better at their jobs and deliver 50% of that. And the other 50% is going to come from more aggressive marketing, more aggressive pricing or something else. So now we have a 50K of the 100K attributed to training. So now it's just an ROI question, which is, okay, if we're going to spend money on training and it has to earn us 50 grand in outcome, what are we prepared to invest to get the 50 grand result? So we might say maybe a 500% ROI is what we're seeking. So in other words, we're happy to spend 10 grand on training if that will deliver a 50 grand sales boost at the end of the day. So then we've got our 500% ROI on training, and then we've got our 50% contribution towards the organizational objective.
Okay, great.
I really like this one because it also then sets goals for the training, right? The training's got to deliver 50 grand. You can start to track actual metrics. You can do level 4 Kirkpatrick analysis. You can kind of do the works on it. But this one really only works when you have kind of financial metrics you can play with or play around with.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is probably going to be a tricky question, but I think some of the stuff we've looked at here are looking at our competition. So looking outwardly at what other people are spending and trying to attach a budget to that. And then other parts of it are what are we trying to achieve as an organization and what do we have to spend in order to get that? How do you think people go about balancing those two things?
Yeah, look, I think you need a balance of a top-down, bottom-up approach and both. So I think you need that bottom-up approach where you sit down and say, what are the organizational objectives we're trying to achieve? That kind of fourth point I've mentioned there. And maybe there's some metrics on it, but there's going to be some non-financial metrics related to training like compliance or induction or employee engagement, right? We need to do that. And so you kind of build up a training budget based on the objectives that you're trying to achieve and the ROIs you're looking for on your investments there. But against that, then, if you can do the top down as well, maybe it's the percent of salaries one, if that's appropriate for your industry, as kind of like a litmus test. You know, are we overshooting, undershooting? Where are we versus our peers?
Yeah.
I think like all budget setting, that top down, bottom up helps you do the sanity check in the middle.
Sure. Now, I want to move on to the next sort of area to talk about, which is these budgeting discussions are often very difficult. They're not a simple, straightforward thing to go through.
No.
So once you've arrived at your budget, how do you defend it? I guess that's the challenge that people face, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, I've come up with this, I need to take it into a meeting, present it, and it needs to be bulletproof.
Yeah, I could almost combine my last two thoughts here together. When I'm going for a budget, I like to have that kind of upper, middle, lower approach. So I'm going with 3 scenarios, and the middle one's probably the one I think I'm going to get. And so I'm positioning it relative. So I'm really thinking I need to be realistic. So I've got my bottom up analysis to show the contribution to organizational goals. I've got my top down to show that we are spending money that's appropriate with other organizations to stay competitive in a variety of ways. And so now I'm going to present 3 scenarios. And I think the key here is to make it in each scenario what you get. So if your low end scenario is half of your middle scenario, that doesn't mean you do the same training, but only half as much of it. It actually means you have to make decisions and say, well, we're not going to do that training at all. We're just going to do this training. So to me, as the budget goes up and down, it's not more people doing the same training or less people doing the same training. It's we're taking projects out or putting projects in so that we're not spreading ourselves thin. We're doing the training that we're doing well. Even if we're doing less of it, each of it's done really well and has a chance to succeed. And as we get more budget, we can build more things in. And I think this helps other stakeholders understand the spend. Okay, so if we're going to cut the training budget, it means we don't get training on these things at all. Yeah. And therefore, we're going to go all in on these other things. So let's do it that way. And if we spend more, we can see the benefit because we now get to fold in this whole new thing that we couldn't otherwise do. Yeah. So I think having those 3 scenarios very much linked as what you get as a package within there is very important.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more defendable, doesn't it? When
it does. And I think that's probably my final point, that if you get pushback and you don't get the training budget you want, it's very easy to say, that's totally fine, then we're not doing these things.
Yeah.
And so you don't then have to say, well, I've just got less budget. Now what am I going to do? Because you made the what am I going to do very linked to the budget approval and the scenario choices there. So it's much easier for you, I think, as a training manager or HR person to then justify the outcomes to other stakeholders in the business.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, Dave, that's all we've really got time for today. Thanks for your thoughts. It is a difficult topic, this one.
Yeah.
I think we've given people some good advice there.
No worries.
And I'd like to say to everyone, if you're interested in getting your budget tightened up, or if you're building a budget at the moment, jump onto tribalhabits.com. We've got some great articles on there and even some training budget calculators.
Yep.
And also, if you've enjoyed this video blog, be sure to subscribe to the Tribal Habits YouTube page, and we'll be posting more of this content soon. So, Dave, thanks again, and to everyone else, we'll see you all soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Bye, guys.